Seeking solace and success in solitude. I'm going to start up by discussing the relationship between success and solitude. Google the word success, and I guarantee you, there's a chance you'll find an image of someone at the top of a mountain, usually at the very edge, very precarious if you ask me. And often, they're standing there alone. While success may be an on-top-of-the-world experience, it can often be a very lonely one. But that's to be expected, no? After all, everyone tells you how lonely it is at the top, especially those we consider to be successful themselves. I mean, if anyone knows, it should be them, right? Makes sense. But when you think of the word lonely, do you think of the first two definitions given by Merriam-Webster dictionary? Or do you think of the last two? Look even at the example used for the fourth definition. Yikes. If you're like me, the last two are the ones that you normally think of. And that's scary. Would make me not want to be successful at anything at all, ever. However, loneliness is not lack of company. Loneliness is a lack of purpose. What I've come to find in my short life is that once you have a strong conviction of your purpose, even though you may be alone, you won't necessarily feel lonely. And how do you find your purpose? Well, your purpose is inherently tied to your identity. That's a lesson I learned during my gap year before coming to Wesleyan. I took a gap year because I was feeling lost. I had lost sight of who I was and my purpose. My mental health was spiraling, and I had not the slightest clue what to do. Ironically, this happened right after a successful mountaintop period in my life. I had just graduated top of my class. I was named Jamaica's top student based on my performance in our regional examinations. And on top of that, I had just won a national competition. These recent achievements had drawn a lot of attention, and my name and photo could be seen in several of the nation's biggest newspapers. Suddenly, I was surrounded by too many people, pulled in too many directions, and subjected to way too much unsolicited advice, to the point I could no longer identify my own thoughts. My state of confusion negatively affected my college application process, and I was rejected from all 12 colleges that I applied to in the US. When I decided to take the gap year, many people saw this as me giving up, becoming a failure, and they left just as quickly as they came. They hadn't been there for me to begin with. They had been there for the success. So there I was, depressed and alone. Didn't leave the house. I didn't want to be seen by anyone. Didn't want to pick up a single book. I'd watch TV, and I buried myself in social media. But none of this made me feel better. See, what people don't tell you is that not only can it be lonely at the top, but it can be lonely at the bottom and anywhere in between. So how did I rediscover myself and my purpose? How did I find solace in my solitude? I had to go seeking after it. Let's make one thing clear. I did not go looking for it out there in the world. I had to do the seeking internally. It was an intimate introspection and a resolute retrospection. Step one, I had to ask myself some fundamental questions. Who am I? What are my natural abilities? What do I enjoy doing? What do I care about? Where do I want to be in the future? And the list goes on. Answer these questions fully, no superficial answers. Look in the mirror, learn to confront yourself, because it takes a lot of honesty, humility, and believe it or not, humor. You have to learn to laugh at yourself, not take yourself so seriously all the time. And as soon as I did that, my goals and aspirations came into sharper focus. When I stopped being a stranger to myself, I stopped feeling lonely. Step two for me was taking those answers to those fundamental questions and making them actionable items, goals. How can I use my natural abilities to get to me to where I want to be? Will I truly love what I end up doing? And what steps can I take right now to bring me closer to that dream? Now, this process is completely subjective, but I believe these are questions that everyone should ask themselves ever so often, because the answers change frequently. Even the answer to the question, who am I, changes every day. And that's why you have to answer it and not be afraid to get it wrong, because it's not a test. One of the most important things when making goals is learning to be flexible in your method. Leave room for changes so you can adapt. I learned this in my gap year from my past mistakes. That's why it's so important to, retrospect. Also, I recognize that this process is not linear. You will return to each step ever so often because each step informs the others. So the past mistake I learned from was when I applied to sixth form in Jamaica after high school. I only wanted to go to one sixth form, and so that was the only one I applied to. And that's when they rejected me despite me being their most qualified candidate. I was Jamaica's top student. I didn't know what to do. I sank into deep depression and started to have suicidal thoughts. I learned from that mistake of putting all my eggs into one basket, so that later when I applied to colleges, I applied to 12 American universities, not just one. When all 12 rejected me, this time, I had to learn to be flexible with my timeline. So I took an extra year to reapply. What I'm saying is simply don't give up. Keep trying, adjust, and readjust with every attempt. Eventually, I was accepted to Wesleyan University on an academic scholarship. Again, my accomplishments drew a lot of attention from people, even some of those who had been there before, but then left. But this time, I was prepared, and I braced myself for the impact. Again, learning from past mistakes. This brings me to step 3 of finding solace in my solitude. I was comfortable in my own company that I was no longer fearful of being lonely. This allowed me to build a filter for the incoming opinions and advice. While there are definitely benefits to being lonely, there are also benefits to having company of others. And finding solace in solitude is not mutually exclusive from making valuable connections. The key is navigating these relationships in a way so that you can remain in control of your ideals and not allow others to impose their values on you. I stay true to my values from that point and during my time here at Wesleyan. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes I mess up. But I often try to return to these 3 steps I mentioned, and the culmination of my Wesleyan experience is my being named Jamaica's Rhodes Scholar for 2021. Now, I didn't think this feat was possible. Like many out there, I was struggling during the pandemic. But my gap year prepared me for this period of solitude and isolation. Before the pandemic hit, depression was already a worldwide problem. That feeling of sadness, bleakness, and desolation so many people experience has even been studied, and results suggest that teens and young adults are most at risk, at the point in their lives where they are most likely to struggle with their identity. It can only be expected that the rate has gone up even more during the COVID pandemic because of social distancing and isolation. We are, after all, social beings. And this is an adjustment to us. For so many of us, the things we usually associate with identity, our net worth, our place of geographical location, what we do for a living, they're being questioned. And a purpose pales in the picture of the pandemic. So how do we go from feeling lonely to finding peace? How do we find solace in solitude? Well, we have to get back to the basics. Remind yourself of your purpose. And to successfully do that, you have to be confident in who you are. Take a step back. Discover and rediscover your identity, because your success depends on you. And once you figure out the you, the other letters fall into place. Success, whatever that means to you. You see, I'm not here today to give you a definition for success. That's for you to decide, because different things bring joy to different people. So don't go after what makes other people happy, but does absolutely nothing for you. Again, going back to knowing yourself well enough to know what makes you happy. Seek things that really bring you a sense of fulfillment. And if it doesn't work out the first time, keep at it. Successful people have one thing in common, and that's grit. The added benefit of doing things you love is that even if you don't get the intended outcome the first time, you still enjoy the process. And that makes you willing to try it again. With just maybe a little bit of tweaking. Eventually, things will work out. And when they do, Get ready for the onslaught of attention. People will always have something to say, but don't let that deter you or distract you from who you are. I wish you all solace and success in your solitude. Thank you.